His first thought was that his targeting array was malfunctioning. "My targeting array is malfunctioning," he said. Except he said nothing, because nothing came out. Data, in jagged Nagra Kali, rained down his red-glassed vision display. He read it, processed it, and because it made sense, he waited patiently. While he waited, he watched the two humans before him. One of them was Lotara Sarrin. He liked Lotara. The blood hand marked her uniform, and it was a fine sight. He'd been there to see Karn make the mark himself, after all the Void murder Sarrin had committed that fine day. The other human was robed in red, hooded by an overhanging cowl, and possessed 5 rotating eye lenses instead of a face. In fairness, it could have been any number of tech priests, but that didn't matter, as he liked none of them. He had an eidetic memory, as did all legionnaires, so it wasn't that he forgot the priests' names, he just never bothered learning them. He was cold now that he was awake, a penetrating, heavy rain kind of cold that sank into the pores and softened the bones. Not that it mattered. It wasn't like it would kill him. It wasn't like he could even shiver. No room for that in his coffin. When he concentrated, shutting out the outside world, he could almost feel himself, the real himself. A naked, hobbled, fetal curled corpse compacted into an adamantium shell. It might just be his imagination, though. Difficult to say for certain. His vision shook, making the runes blue for a moment. Sound arrived with a blast, bathing him in the noise of a workshop at war. The crackle sizzle of sparks and soldering, the rhythmic clang of forge hammers, the binaric burbles of robed half-men.
"My targeting array is malfunctioning,"
he said. His voice was a mechanical rock slide.
"It shall be attended to,"
the priest replied. He replied in binaric cant, a keening spill of ones and zeros, but it was translated into Nagra Kali and Low Gothic by the visor display.
"Captain Sarrin,"
he said. He'd never been gifted at discerning human physical cues. Her eyes were narrowed, her heartbeat was elevated, her mouth was set in a thin, firm line that paled her lips.
"You are either angry or worried."
"Both," she replied. "Lhorke, I need you to defend the ship." He hadn't refused, not that there was any chance he would. Lotara asked him to stand, to walk, to fight, and he would refuse her nothing. Nor would his brothers. All of them hungered to decorate their armor in blood once more. It had been too long, decades for most of them. Decades, where mercy dictated they'd be locked in dreamless sleep. But stasis was a lie of a word. It was still possible to dream in stasis. Time didn't always freeze for the mind, only the body. The only thing to be locked into was the crippling mawkishness of one's own memories. When he could walk, when he could breathe, when he could feel the kick of a bolter in his fist. Lhorke shed his bleak musing the moment he pulled clear of his restraint platform. The deck shook beneath his boots. That felt good. The tech priests backing away before him as he opened his articulated joint-grinding fists and dry-fired the combi bolters in his palms. That felt good, too.
"Load me,"
he commanded them. They'd obeyed. And the truth was, having them obey his orders also felt very fine indeed. They'd loaded him as they finished waking his brothers. His brothers listened to him in death as they had in life. They were the first, yet he was the first. And while the emphasis was subtle, a single capital letter, the distinction was everything. They were also the wounded, the failures, The ones who endured their handlers whispering binaric code words such as unstable and volatile and terminal degradation. That's why they weren't on the surface. That's why they were kept in stasis. They were the oldest, the first, before the techniques had been perfected. Helisek lacked one arm. His iron form was undergoing repair when he'd been reawakened, and he'd come online with a crushing power fist for a left arm and the bizarre loss of temporary amputation on the right. Krydal couldn't speak. His sarcophagus was bolted into his iron form, still damaged from his last battle, blessed and consecrated by holy oils, but installed without his delicate vocabulator circuitry in place. No time for such things. Neris was worst of all. He woke, enraged, lost to the nails, forever lost, even while he slumbered in stasis. Chains broke beneath his first heaving steps, and his roaring chain blades drowned out the sound of all other industry in the teeming workshop. The wiser tech priests ran. The more devoted, or more foolish, tried to restrain him with electroshock bindings, and in one hilarious instance, a prayer to the machine god meant to invoke a sense of calm. Lhorke had brought his lost brother back. He achieved it by a volley of combi bolter fire against the other dreadnought's sarcophagus to gain his attention, and then by beating him into submission with heavy fists. It was no contest at all. As the first, Lhorke was more than a sarcophagus bound to a war body. His iron form was an avatar of the machine god. The Legion had honored him, resurrecting him as a contemptor. Neris was still frantic, still fierce, but he'd come back from the precipice. He could function for now. 13 of them in all. 13 of the 12th Legion's first dreadnoughts. Lucifer and Deredeo patterns, variously abandoned or intentionally forgotten, now standing in unique states of disrepair. They led the defense as the only World Eaters on board. World Eaters. Lhorke still felt an intruder to that name. He'd lived and died as a warhound in the decades before Angron, before they took the name Eaters of Worlds to honor the Primarch's slain rebel army, the Eaters of Cities. He still displayed the old Legion's scratch kill markings on his iron form, and on his breastplate he bore the armored wolf's head, collared by a chain around its throat. Warhounds. That was his Legion, not these furious, half-lobotomized madmen who abandoned all notions of honor when they lost themselves to berserker rage. Even so, they were still his brothers. He couldn't hate them, but he could blame them. The rot started to creep in when they rediscovered the Primarch from that worthless world he called home. And yet, the Legion could still have refused the nails. They chose to emulate their Genefather, despite all it would clearly cost. They chose to tear open their skulls and let the poison be placed inside. Angron had ordered it, but was that an excuse? Could the Primarch have forced 100,000 warriors to bend to his will if they'd refused the mutilation of their minds? Lhorke had fallen in battle 30 years before the Primarch's arrival. He'd been active day and night back then, before the mind's sluggishness began to take hold. It was difficult to remain awake after a few years. The mind, forced to exert itself to command the iron form, began to suffer the strain of isolation and claustrophobic confinement. So he'd started submitting to the restful half-sleep of stasis. A few months at first. Then it became a year for every year he remained awake. He needed more and more rest to balance the exertion of mastering his iron form. He'd never felt the kiss of the nails in his brain pan, though. It was easy enough, given his circumstances. Beating them into his corpse's skull came with significant risk, and he was a relic by any virtue of the word. They wouldn't risk him in the surgery. so he remained one of the few warhounds among the rising ranks of the World Eaters. But what was done was done. The old Legion and the new were bonded by blood, no matter how many disparate worlds the warriors had been drawn from over the decades. Kinship flowed between them, whether he willed it or not. Blood, as so many of their parent cultures had said, was thicker than water. Lotara ordered the robed priestlings to upload a tactical feed of the Ultramarines' boarding pod location points.
The what?
Lhorke had asked. He turned from watching Neris undergoing the chanted ritual of reawakening and looked down at Captain Sarrin's tiny figure.
The Ultramarines, she replied. The 13th Legion Astartes?
She looked worried, as if he'd forgotten who the 13th actually were. Something rattled and clanked deep in his heavy metal guts.
You want me to kill Ultramarines?
They boarded us,
she insisted. Lhorke crouched down, his joints giving industrial-grade snarls as he did so. He brought his cranial input-output node, fashioned as an armored helm, almost level with her face. A giant, kneeling to address a child.
Why did they board us?
She was obviously worried now.
Can't you fight other Legionnaires?
Of course he could. He'd fought the wolves, hadn't he? Sent them yelping back to their gunships after they came howling about the nails, after Angron had assumed command over the Legion. As long as he lived within this fetid cold coffin, he'd never forget Angron and Russ, fighting in the amber light of that alien sunset. The battlefield had reeked of their godly blood.
What reason?
He replied to Lotara.
Why are we at war with the Ultramarines?
Because...
She trailed off. That's when she turned to a nearby priest and ordered a further uploading of data. They weren't at war with the Ultramarines. They were at war with half the Imperium. They were openly at war with the Emperor now, and they had been for over a year. Most of the time seemed to have been spent in warp transit, descending on unsuspecting worlds still blind to the unfolding war, and massacring their populations wholesale. Angron, he thought. The sheer bitterness of the conjured name made his corpse tremble in the amniotic fluid of his coffin cradle. He felt his own withered limbs tense and twitch. With that indecipherable dose of madness in mind, Lhorke had led his wounded and abandoned brothers back into battle.